How's it going, everybody? Welcome back to the channel and welcome back to yet another maintenance video on the MK7 GTI. This car is my most reliable car. And you'll note today that it is up on jack stands. It is not normally this monster trucky and does not normally come up to my waist because we are doing Bilstein B6 OEM Plus upgrade shocks on this car. Now I have a set of these for all four corners. The back ones look different. And they are going to replace the very tired OEM shocks that are on this car. I'm gonna put this down before I drop it. The shocks that came on this car are going on 8 years old now and have unfortunately started to show some age. Clunks, rattles, and the occasional bump stop hit where the shock is bottoming out because the spring is doing most of the work. A lot of these cars have started to show their age as they are coming up on 10 years old. 2015 was the first year we got in America. So we're right on the cusp there. The reason I chose to do the B6s, now most of you are probably wondering why I chose to do an OEM Plus shock as opposed to a coilover. And the number one thing there is this is my daily. I don't want to do coilovers on my daily because lower cars in Pittsburgh suck. That's it. That's the end. That's the story. I don't want to do it. I have a sports car. If I want to drive that, I will and compress my back a little bit more. The other thing is you have to do tuning on those, and I don't know how to do that because I have not learned yet, and I don't want to learn on this car. So I chose to do B6 Bilstein shocks on all four corners. Now, if you do want to do lowering springs, you can, but I would recommend doing B8s as they are tuned for that. Now, if you have DCC, dynamic chassis control, for your car, you cannot use these. Well, you can, but you would need a resistor pack. Your other option is to do B16s, which are the same shock, but with the DCC built in. I don't have that, fortunately, so I don't have to worry about it. But now let's dive into it. I'm gonna start with the fronts because they're the ones I'm the most worried about, which we'll talk about now. Once the tire is removed, you can go start by removing the sway bar end link. These attach to the shock body and would prevent you from removing them from the car. They are attached with a 16mm bolt, and you really only need to remove the top one, although if these are in need of servicing, this would be a good time to remove both and get a new one in there. You may be noticing an abnormal amount of hammering going into this process. That is because the sway bar end link perch on my stock strut was damaged by the previous owner. Now it is time to remove the lower shock retaining bolt. This bolt holds pressure on the bottom of the shock, keeping it retained in the knuckle. This bolt is one-time use, so you will be needing to replace this on both sides. This is one of many single-use bolts on the suspension. Now the particular method I'm going to be using to remove the shocks from the car is called the 2x4 method. The other method would be to remove the knuckle from the car to give you enough space to separate the shock. However, I don't want to do that, and this was given to me as an alternative. What you're going to need to do is trim a 2x4 or some piece of wood, as you can clearly tell this is not a 2x4, down to the right size. This will depend on how high you have the car, and then drill a hole on one end for the lower shock mount bolt to go through. Since this bolt will be reused, it doesn't matter if it gets a little chewed up during this process. Next, you will need a specialty tool. This is called a knuckle spreader. It goes into the back of the knuckle where the shock body is inserted and spreads the metal out, allowing the shock to drop just like this. There's before on the left and after on the right. Now, of course, you could use an Allen key. There are many forums explaining how to do that. Grind down both sides, and then you should be able to force it in and turn it. But this tool wasn't that expensive, and it really did make life easy. The application of a little PB blaster and some persuasion with a mallet and the 2x4 attached where the sway bar end link would attach to the spring. The shock came out fairly easily. Last thing holding the shock into the car are 3 non-reusable bolts holding the top hat to the chassis. These are 13mm bolts. So this is the shock that just came off the car. This is your OEM shock. This is what it will look like. I have it clamped in a vise here because, I'll be honest, dear viewer, I'm a little scared of this part. See this? This is what you call a spring. This spring is under a lot of tension. This is a grenade. If I were to just unbolt this right now, this would go straight up and probably keep going until it hit something in space. So, to try to prevent that, I went out and I bought a tool. This tool came courtesy of Harbor Freight, and it is this. These are spring compressors. They have teeth on them that grab onto either side of this coil spring and should keep it under tension so that I can transfer it onto the new shock. Wish me luck.
However much I would have loved to show you that process, my camera unfortunately corrupted the file where I attached them to the spring. Of course, it is pretty self-explanatory how to actually do it. One on either side of the spring, trying to keep them as lined up as possible to each other to stop them from being able to slide or unevenly apply pressure to the spring. Then it's just up to screwing down one side, then the other, then the other, then the other, until you get enough pressure off of the top hat to unbolt it. The new Bilstein shocks are internally bump stopped, so you do not need to retain the bump stop that came off of this. I initially thought you did, but it is not something that needs to be swapped to the new shock. It also will not fit. The only things you need to recover from the old shock are this dust cover if you did not order the one from Bilstein for the new shock. However, I would recommend that you do that because this one will not fit properly. It is just kind of a jerry-rigged thing. The other thing you need to save is the rubber spring perch for the bottom of the spring to rest on the shock, or you might get some rattling from the shock and the spring when you decompress and recompress. With the new Bilstein in the vise, it is time to put the perch pad onto the new shock. This one is again transferred from your old shock. I should say only retain this if it is in good condition as mine was. If not, just replace it. It's not that expensive. Next, it is time to try and put the old dust cover on. As I said earlier, just go buy the new one. It isn't that expensive and it saves you a lot of time and headache. He's going to keep trying for a while.
So if you're currently watching this wondering what the hell I'm doing, this is a dust shield. I'm going to put my glove back on before I lose it. This is a dust shield. This comes on your factory shock and it has this little cup in it that normally on the old shock slipped right through this little hole. The problem is this one has a thicker shaft and doesn't want to slip any further down. So my thought was to just stick it on here with this like this, so everything will fit properly, and this can still protect the actual shock body. We'll put this upside down. From any rock hits or anything like that. Now, this will protect, hopefully, and we can move on to this. So these are 034 Motorsports bearing and topper. There's a thing in there. Now these will go onto here, and there is a little tab on the back here that lines up with, there's a tab right here that lines up and corresponds with this little space right there. So it will slot into it like that. And now you should be able to just start to tighten everything back up, which is going to inevitably be easier said than done. So this is going to want to turn as you do that. Now at this point, while you are removing these, this is when you can throw a zip tie down here if you really want to make sure this doesn't go anywhere, but I'm not going to bother. I don't think it's going anywhere. Now this top hat nut needs to be tightened to 25 Newton meters or 18.5 pound-feet of torque. Okay. So those are now on and tight, and this can now go back into the car.
The sheet metal on your fenders is very thin, so be careful when inserting.
Whoops.
Never mind. The 3 top mount bolts are 15 Newton meters plus 90 degrees. They are torque to yield, so make sure you do this properly.
Tool is in place. Let me grab the board.
Keep an eye on the placement of your jack. I accidentally caught the bottom of my control arm here and was just raising everything together, which is not helpful. While this process is pretty simple, it is very possible to snap the wood if you do it wrong.
Woo, shit.
Lower bolt is again torque to yield, so it needs to be replaced as it is one-time use. This should be tightened to 70 Newton meters and then an additional 180 degrees. That's 52 foot-pounds for you Americans out there. Again, plus 180 degrees. Last step is to reinstall the sway bar end link. Again, replace it if it needs it. But now it's onto the back. And we are going to start by removing all the bolts holding in the fender liner.
Right, so now that the inner wheel liner is out of our way, it is time to actually get the shock out. So you see I'm holding my light here, so you can see these are the 2 bolts that hold in the upper mount. And right down here is the only bolt that holds in the lower mount. Since this is a divorced shock strut, so here's your shock over here, and this is your strut, you don't need to worry about the shock at all. It will stay in the car while we are doing the work on the actual strut piece here. So now let's get this bolt out down here. It is a 18 millimeter on both sides. So you're going to need to get out 1 bolt here. And if you can see under here, which you cannot because it is very dark, there is the nut right down here. Same thing, 18 millimeter, and you'll just whiz it out.
The first bolt is rather easy, however you do have to remove the charcoal canister to get to the second one, but again, it's not tightened in very much, so you should be able to get it out pretty easily. The rear shocks are super simple. Only 1 bolt holds the top hat onto the shock. This can be undone by using an open-ended wrench, or in my case, a pass-through wrench, and something to hold on to the top of the shock. Then you can remove the top hat. I have new ones from 034 Motorsports. Transfer the bump stop and the dust shield on, retighten everything down, and you're good to put this back in the car. Make sure to torque this nut to 37 foot-pounds or 50 Newton meters and then an additional 45 degrees. The upper mounting bracket bolts should be tightened to 25 Newton meters or 18.5 foot-pounds. The singular lower bolt needs to be tightened to 70 Newton meters or 52 foot-pounds plus 180 degrees. However, they need to be done at ride height, so you'll need to put a jack underneath the lower arm and get the car as close to ride height as you can. Now, unfortunately, I had shot a very interesting ending to this video, but in typical technology-loving me fashion, it did not make the transfer from my camera to my storage drive, so I will leave you with these remarks. The suspension has been fantastic. All the clunks and rattles from the stock suspension are no longer there. All of the issues I was having with the bearing top hats and other auxiliary pieces are gone, and the cornering abilities that the B6s have given the car have made the car feel so much more capable. In addition to the 034 Motorsports rear sway bar, and continuing to use the plastic OEM sway bar end links, I can say that this is a fantastic mod for your car. And while they are quite pricey, your Mark 7's worth it, and so are you. But that is going to conclude this video. Thank you all so much for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you all next time. Peace.